The late autumn wind carried a chill through the small frontier town of Red River, rattling the loose boards of the mercantile's porch and sweeping dust across the street. Inside, the smell of flour, salt pork, and rough-cut lumber mixed with the chatter of townsfolk stocking up for the coming winter. Among them stood Clara Dawson, a young woman with tired eyes and a dress that had been mended so many times its original color was hard to guess. She clutched a small leather coin purse in her hand, worry carved into the lines of her face. The storekeeper, Mr. Hargrove, peered down at her from behind the counter, shaking his head as she carefully laid out her coins, 3 nickels, a dime, and a few worn pennies. "I'm sorry, Miss Dawson," he said, his tone more businesslike than cruel. "Not near enough for what you're askin'. Flour, beans, and salt pork don't come cheap. Prices are up again, and I can't just give it away." Clara's cheeks burned with embarrassment as the people behind her shifted impatiently, trying not to stare. She whispered something too soft for most to hear, gathered her coins back into the purse, and turned toward the door with her basket still empty. Her boots tapped across the wooden floor, each step heavier than the last. When she pushed open the door, the cold air met her face, and with it, a wave of hopelessness. She had a younger brother and 2 little sisters waiting in their cabin at the edge of town, their stomachs hollow from days of meager meals. She had promised them she'd bring food today, but promises didn't fill plates. Across the street, sitting tall in the saddle of a chestnut gelding, a cowboy had been watching. His name was Caleb Turner, a ranch hand known around Red River for his quiet strength and steady nature. He wasn't the loudest man in the saloon, nor the one to boast about cattle drives or poker winnings. But folks knew he carried a sense of decency that ran deep, like the roots of the cottonwoods along the river. He had seen Clara before, passing in town, sometimes hanging laundry outside her cabin, but today, something about the slump of her shoulders and the way she clutched that empty basket pierced him. He didn't know her story in detail, but he didn't need to. He could see hunger plain as day. When she stepped off the porch, brushing away a tear before it could fall, Caleb guided his horse forward. He tipped his hat, his voice low but kind. "Ma'am," he said, "pardon me for intrudin', but I couldn't help notice you walked out without nothin'." Clara froze, startled to be addressed. She managed a polite but guarded nod. "Just a mistake," she muttered. "I'll be fine." Caleb studied her for a moment. He saw the pride in her words, the kind that refused pity even when the stomach growled. He leaned down slightly, his eyes steady on hers. "Come with me," he said softly, but firmly. "I'll fill your table tonight." For a moment, Clara thought she'd misheard. Her throat tightened, and she shook her head quickly. "No, sir. I couldn't accept that. You don't even know me." Caleb gave a faint smile. "Don't need to. A table's meant to have food on it, and no one should walk away hungry from that store. Not while I got 2 good hands and a few dollars to my name." Clara's lips trembled. She wanted to protest again, but the sincerity in his voice left no room for doubt. He wasn't offering charity with strings attached, he was offering kindness, plain and simple. And for the first time in weeks, she felt the weight on her chest ease, just a little. Back inside the store, Caleb strode up to the counter and placed several coins on the worn wood. 2 sacks of flour, beans, salt pork, coffee, and sugar, he said. "And don't skimp, Hargrove." The storekeeper raised an eyebrow, surprised at the order, but quickly moved to gather the goods. Clara stood nearby, her eyes wide, hands gripping her empty basket as though it might break. When the supplies were piled high, Caleb helped carry them outside. He whistled for his horse to kneel so he could lash the bags to the saddle. Clara followed silently, unsure how to thank him without her voice breaking. As the last sack was secured, Caleb turned to her. "Where's home?" he asked gently. She hesitated, then pointed toward the hills beyond town. "Cabin by Miller's Creek, just past the cottonwoods." "Good spot," he said with a nod. "Why don't you ride along? Basket's too light now, but I reckon your family's gonna be surprised." The ride out was quiet at first. Clara sat side saddle on the horse Caleb offered, her hands clutching the reins tightly. The late sun cast gold across the prairie, and the smell of sage lingered in the wind. After a while, Caleb spoke. "Got folks waitin' on you. My brother Jacob, he's 12. And my sisters, Mary and Eliza. They're just 9 and 6. Her voice softened. "We've managed since Pa passed last spring, but it's been hard. Mama died years before, and I've been doing my best. Guess sometimes my best ain't enough. Caleb listened without interrupting, his jaw tightening with quiet respect. Sounds like you been carrying a load too heavy for one set of shoulders. Nothing wrong with letting someone lend a hand. They reached the cabin just as twilight fell. The children ran out, their faces lighting up at the sight of Clara and the cowboy with his saddlebags full. When the food was unloaded onto the rough-hewn table inside, the cabin filled with laughter and the smell of coffee brewing. For the first time in months, the Dawson family ate until they were full. Clara sat across from Caleb at the table, tears shining in her eyes as she watched her siblings devour beans and fresh bread. She whispered, "You didn't just fill our table, Mr. Turner. You gave us hope." Caleb met her gaze, his voice steady but warm. "Hope's the best thing a man can share. It don't cost much, but it can change everything." In that small cabin, something shifted. Not just in Clara's life, but in Caleb's too. He had set out that morning thinking only of his chores and the coming winter. Yet here he was, realizing that sometimes the greatest purpose a man could find was in lifting someone else. Word spread through Red River in the days that followed. Folks whispered about how Caleb Turner bought food for the Dawson family, and how their laughter could now be heard drifting from their cabin by Miller's Creek. Some shrugged it off, saying it was just one good deed. But others looked at their own neighbors differently, wondering if maybe kindness could ripple outward like stones tossed in water. Winter came hard that year, with snow piling deep and the river freezing solid. Yet the Dawson cabin stayed warm, not just from the fire but from the steady visits of Caleb Turner, who often brought wood, mended fences, or shared stories that made the children giggle. Clara's pride softened into gratitude, and gratitude bloomed into trust. By spring, the prairie was alive with wildflowers, and a new season had begun, not just for the land, but for Clara and her family. What started with a cowboy's simple words outside a store had grown into something far richer. He hadn't just filled a table, he had filled a home with hope, love, and the promise of tomorrow. And as folks in Red River often said long after, when you saw someone turned away, you never knew what might happen if you had the courage to step forward and say, "Come with me, I'll fill your table tonight." One heartwarming closing message. This story reminds us that one act of compassion can transform lives. We never know how deeply a kind word or gesture may reach. In a world where many are turned away, we all have the chance to be someone who says, "Come with me, I'll share what I have."